There's a place He comes to me. Though I'm blind, He helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see Him face to face.
This is Kurt Kaikkonen, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, at your neighborhood church. Today on Face to Face, we'll be in the book of Acts. So grab your Bibles and let's get started. If you want to hear this complete message in its entirety, go to yourneighborhoodchurch.com, where you can download Your Neighborhood Church app at the App Store. And so what Julius is doing here by traveling on these smaller ships is that he's trying to get to a larger city where he can find a ship that's large enough to go straight to Rome. So it's kind of like taking those little hopper flights, trying to get to a larger airport to get a non-stop flight. Where these larger type ships, you can't even find them in the smaller cities. So you can't even find them in the cities like Caesarea. And then we also hear in verse 2 where we read, "We put to sea," which means that Dr. Luke, in his humble way, he's saying that he's going with Paul. And this is probably as his personal physician. And it's not only Luke that's with Paul, but we also see that Aristarchus is probably going along as Paul's assistant, where Paul, in his letter to the Colossians, he mentions Aristarchus as being a fellow prisoner. But here with Aristarchus, on his part, it was all voluntary. Okay, so now they sail on the smaller ship 80 miles to Sidon. And Sidon is in Lebanon, and that would have taken them about a day and a half. And then in Sidon, Paul was given the freedom to meet with other believers who provided for Paul and his crew. Where then from Sidon, they sailed to Myra, which we see here that the winds, they're already bad for sailing. And that's why they're sailing between the island of Cyprus and the mainland, because they usually would sail on the outside of Cyprus. And then when they get to Myrna, which is in Turkey, Julius the centurion found an Alexandrian ship, which means it's from Alexandria, Egypt. And this ship was going straight to Italy. Where this ship too, it would be taking grain to Rome, because Egypt at this time was the breadbasket of the Roman Empire, where it produced a lot of their grain. And so this is a large ship for its day. And so it's about 180 feet long and 45 feet wide. And so this ship would be able to handle the open seas. So this ship is not only carrying the grain from Rome, but it also has enough room to carry these 276 passengers that come on board. And what you need to realize here is that they're taking off late in the year. This is toward the end of sailing season, because the westerly winds have already began to blow. And so their travel is slow, where it tells us it took them many days to get to Fair Havens, which is on the island of Crete, which is usually only a short trip, where Fair Havens is about 500 miles from Myra, but here it's taken them about 15 days. And so now with this ship at the port at Fair Havens, everybody's aware that they're not going to make it to Rome this year, not before the winter has passed. Because here we're told that the fast is already over. And the fast that they're talking about here is Yom Kippur. They're talking about the Jewish Day of Atonement, where the actual date of this actual year would have been October 5th in the year of 59 AD, where any time after September 14th, it was always dangerous to sail on the Mediterranean Sea. And it will stay that way, and it'll remain dangerous up until November 11th. But then after November 11th, all sailing is shut down, because after November 11th, the sea became impossible to sail, and it stays that way until after February. And for some reason,
Paul, he is being brought into this discussion on moving the ship, where Paul, he's not an expert on sailing, but Paul does have a lot of experience on being shipwrecked, because we know from 2 Corinthians 11 that had already been written by this time, Paul has already survived 3 shipwrecks, where he spent one time a whole day and a night in the sea waiting to be rescued. And so at this time, Paul, he's been on at least 11 ship journeys, and he's traveled over 3,500 miles by sea. But for most, Fair Havens is not the kind of port that you want to harbor your ship in for the winter, with one of the reasons being it's just a small town, so there's not much to do in the winter. But it also has a shallow harbor, and it's open to the sea, and so it receives a good brunt of the winter storms. And so Paul, he has a word of warning for them. And here he doesn't say it's from God, but that doesn't mean that it's not from God, because all of what Paul says here would have come true if God had not intervened. But here in verse 10, the Greek word that Paul uses here for perceived, it means to perceive from past experience. So Paul, he perceives from his past experience that there will be a loss of cargo, the ship, and their lives. But the ship owner and the ship's captain, they don't see it that way. And they're the experts here. And so Julius, the centurion, who's in charge, he'd rather listen to them because they're only going to try to go 40 miles to Phoenix, which is just around the corner on the island of Crete, which would only take them a few hours. So this is sort of a 3-hour tour. But we've seen from Gilligan's Island that a 3-hour tour can end up quite crazy, where it didn't really work out for the skipper, Gilligan. But Phoenix, it was a larger town, and it had a deeper port with more protection from the storms. And so Paul, his advice is disregarded, and it seems to them that they made the right decision, because the weather did change and things began so perfectly, where here it looks like Paul was wrong, where now they have this gentle, soft wind beginning to blow from the west. It's just exactly what they needed. But then this soft wind turns into a tempestuous wind. And a tempestuous wind, that's where we get our word typhoon. And this one is called a Euroclydon, which is a hybrid word that's made up from 2 words. One of the words is Latin and the other one is Greek, which means a northeasterner, which means it's a hurricane. This is a storm that's impossible to steer. And though they were just traveling around the coast of Crete, it's now impossible to return to the island, where the ship is now driven into the open seas. And so what they do is they just let the ship go, and they just let it drive itself. Where at this point, the ship has now drifted 23 miles toward the island of Clauda, where now the skiff, which is that little dinghy boat that they tow behind the ship, it's now become a liability to them because it's crashing into the main ship, and it's causing enough damage to make a shipwreck. And so now they pull it on board. Where at this time, they're working hard just to keep the ship afloat. And so now they're wrapping chains and ropes around the hull of the ship just to hold the ship together. And they're going so fast where, because of their speed, they're afraid of getting shipwrecked on these sandbars off of the shallow Gulf of North Africa called the Syrtis Sands. And so they take down their sails, and then it says they struck sail. And what struck sail means, it means that they threw an anchor over the stern of the ship to slow the ship down. All right, so the next day, they throw out everything personal overboard except for some of the grain, because they have to lighten the ship just to stay afloat. Where then on the 3rd day, where it says we, so Luke and Paul, they're helping here, where it says that they threw the ship's tackle overboard, which means if this storm ever ends, they will have no way of steering the ship, because that's what ship tackle does. But they have no choice. It's either lighten the ship or sink. And they haven't seen the stars or the sun for days, which means that they have absolutely no idea where they are because they always navigated by the stars. Because all the ancient navigational equipment, it hasn't been invented yet. So the only way that they knew how to navigate was by the position of the stars, by the position of the sun, where to them it seems that the storm will never end, with days of darkness, with no one eating, because if they did eat, they wouldn't be able to keep it down anyways because of the seasickness. So it's just one wave hitting them after another. And then we get to the saddest verse of this whole passage, where it says, all hope that we would be saved was finally given up. Where this means everyone, where everyone here is thinking, we're going to die. And where here it even says, we. So that means this is how Luke feels. And this is even how the Apostle Paul feels, where even these great Christian believers, these men of faith who know God and who are known by God, where even the great Apostle Paul has given up all hope of being saved. And I don't know if you ever thought you were going to die, but I came close once, and that was in January of 2018, when living in Hawaii, when the Hawaiian government, they sent out this emergency alert saying, with this text saying, ballistic missiles threat inbound to Hawaii, seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill. But that wasn't even like this here, where their hope has been slowly drained away, where you're living with this dread for days and days. And many of us will go through storms like this in our lives, where this is not just a regular storm. This is greater than that. This is more than just going through tough times. This is where there's no hope. This is the kind of storms that overwhelms us, that we can't survive. And we see those kind of examples all throughout the Bible. We saw that Job, that he had that kind of a storm where he wished that he had never been born, and he meant it, where he longed for death. And then David, before he became king, he had given up all hope, believing that Saul would one day kill him, even though he had the promise of being king. Or the disciples in the boat crying out to Jesus during their storm, don't you care that we're perishing? We're here. It's the same, because Paul here, he had a promise to see Rome, but he still lost his hope. Where the surviving of these storms or these types of trials in life, they have nothing to do with us, where survival has nothing to do with our faith. Because the only way to get through these storms is that God brings us through them, where it's not our faith, but it's God's faithfulness, where it's not that we have such a grip on God, but that God has his grip on us. And you have to see here, none of this is because Paul is in any kind of disobedience. It's not like he's running away from God's will. He desires God's will. So it's not like he's backslidden. But the fact is that Paul here, that he's in the middle of God's will, and God has not only allowed this, but God, he's still the one who's in control here.
You've been listening to Face to Face. Face to Face on this radio station has been provided by Your Neighborhood Church. If you want to help support Face to Face and put this program on other stations just like yours, you can contact us at yourneighborhoodchurch.com or write Your Neighborhood Church, P.O. Box 500, Romeo, Michigan 48065.
There's a place he comes to me. Though I'm blind, he helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see him face to face.
Tune in again tomorrow at this same time as we continue to go through the Bible.